Hello, welcome back. I have a reading report for you today. So I have finished 4 books since my last reading update video, and most of them were pretty good. I did have one DNF. I'll talk about that soon, and we'll just get right into it. So I talked about this at the very end of my last reading update video. This is Jack Currie's Lancaster Target, and Jack Currie was a pilot of a Lancaster bomber in, I think, 1943 and 44. And this is a look back on his 30 missions. He flew 30 missions as an Avro Lancaster pilot. And the Lancaster has been sort of forgotten over the years, but it could actually carry more bombs than a B-17, although it was more lightly armed. And at the time, they were doing these night raids, because bombing during the day, trying to bomb these German factories and that sort of thing, these factories that were keeping the war machine going, was extremely dangerous during the daytime. So they started doing nighttime missions. And so there were some things in this book that were really interesting. So flying over these cities at night with all these searchlights going and this flak exploding in the air and having to escape from these night fighters and that sort of thing. It was pretty interesting. This was not the best book about a bomber pilot that I have ever read, but it was very, very interesting. And it did have that sort of 30 years worth of detachment, because he was writing in the 1970s, looking back on the 40s. And so I enjoyed this. I can't say that it was super dramatic or anything like that. There were no real big moments that you might get in some other books. Maybe that has to do with just the nature of night flying. Some of the scariest things in this book was not the flak or the German fighters. It was just the hazards of flying an aircraft like this that might lose its engines at any time. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, was at one point they did lose 2 engines on the same wing, and he had to fly it back, and it was not cooperating, and they were afraid they were going to have to ditch, but no one did. And they had to go around and around this airfield to land. And I just found that really interesting. But some of the most dangerous times, of course, the most dangerous time in any aircraft, even today, is takeoff and landing. And it was even more so at the time, when you had this fully loaded bomber filled to the brim with fuel. So every mission, they never knew if they were going to come back, whether they were going to be shot down and become POWs in German prison camp, or if they were just going to be killed outright. They never even knew if they were going to make it off the ground sometimes. And I enjoyed this. Like I said, it was not the most dramatic account of this that I have ever read. It may not have been the best account, but I really enjoyed this, and I had never read a book about a Lancaster bomber before, so I really enjoyed this. Now, the next book I finished was by Andy Rooney. This is Sincerely Andy Rooney. This is a collection of Andy Rooney's letters. And you may be asking yourself, if you are not as old as I am, who is Andy Rooney? So for a long time, he worked for CBS, and he was part of 60 Minutes. He did a lot of writing for different television shows on CBS. I think it was CBS, right? It's been a long time since I've watched network television, so I can't remember exactly. And Andy Rooney sort of made himself famous by being a sort of penny-pinching curmudgeon who was very blunt about things. So this is a collection of letters that he wrote to his friends, to people that would write into the show to talk to him, people who were making complaints and that sort of thing. Letters to lawyers, letters to his bosses, that sort of stuff. And I have read a lot of books by Andy Rooney. I think I've read probably, this was probably something like my 6th book by Andy Rooney. Okay. And so I quit reading them for quite some time. I just burned out on them, because it can be very overwhelming to read a book by someone who is overwhelmingly petty and negative in most cases. And I really like Andy. I like the way that his mind works in some ways, but in other ways he just seems to me very, very rude to some of these people that he was writing to for no reason. He was the kind of person who would write a letter to a company and be very rude to the people in that company while being very witty, trying to show how the person is stupid, how their business is stupid, all that sort of stuff. He could be very blunt and unpleasant to people. There are letters that he wrote to school children who had written him letters from their class that was very blunt and unpleasant and rude. Uh, I read this entire thing. I think I did skip a few letters here and there that I just was not interested in. And I I don't know. I'm really glad that I've read these books by Andy Rooney, but I am getting to the point where I am glad that there are no more for me to read, really. There are actually several more for me to read, but if I will ever come across those books, I don't know. I have his memoir of the Second World War. He was a reporter for Stars and Stripes in Europe during the Second World War, and he did fly several combat missions on bombers and that sort of thing. Uh, but just being bombarded with his negativity, uh, it was just a little bit much. It was just too much, and it's just become too much. I still like him, but I'm sort of glad that he's not my neighbor or anything like that, right? Like I would there's letters in this, for instance, to Mike Wallace. Mike Wallace was on 60 Minutes. He was a reporter and everything. And I don't think I'd have wanted to be friends with Andy Rooney either. Like, I think he could have been a good friend, but I wouldn't have wanted to get one of his letters or anything like that. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I I think that I am just uh, he comes across as more rude and petty and blunt in this book, in these letters, than he does even in his 60 Minutes, uh, a couple of minutes with Andy Rooney segments and that sort of thing. These were just unpleasant and short, and there were a few that were really good, a few that were really insightful, and because they go all the way back into the 1940s, he writes to some of the people that he had known during the Second World War and that sort of thing. But I was very glad to actually be done with this book. And after that, I read one that I picked up rather recently. This is Born to Kill by T.J. English. And now, Born to Kill was the name of a Vietnamese gang that was started in New York City by this guy right here. This is David Ty. And so this takes place in the late 80s and early 90s. And the and David Ty had taken advantage of these young Vietnamese men who, because of the Vietnam War, had been displaced from their homes. A lot of them had been through really awful circumstances in Vietnam and in refugee camps and that sort of thing. And he had come to America, become a petty criminal, and he was very ambitious. He always wanted more and more and more. And he lived in Chinatown in New York City. This is where he started his gang. And he was trying basically to become the boss of bosses in Chinatown. And so the main crimes of this Born to Kill gang, their main focus was in robbing restaurants, stores, jewelry stores, that sort of thing, and taking tens of thousands of dollars at a time from these places. And there were already very well-established Chinese gangs in Chinatown. I think they were called the Tong. And they did not take very kindly to having this new Vietnamese gang in their midst, particularly because the Born to Kill gang was being very violent towards them, was killing some of them and that sort of thing, and disrespecting them in their own turf. And so this photo was taken at a funeral, and it was of the second in command of this Born to Kill gang. And a rival gang came in during this very funeral, and it was like a very cinematic thing, actually. They had on like duster coats, and they were carrying flowers, and then they dropped the flowers and like pulled out their guns. They had sunglasses on and everything, and they just started shooting into this crowd. And so when that happened, David Ty started to look further into the country, so into different cities all over the country. And their main focus, like I said, was doing these robberies, and it just brought so much heat on them that the law enforcement decided to take them down. And we also get that side of it. We get an ATF agent, a police detective with NYPD. I can't remember who else. There were several other people in this group that were all working together to bring down this gang. And we get their personalities brought to life, how they had their problems with each other, particularly the NYPD detective, who was very, very ambitious and unpleasant and trying to take off the glory, basically, is the way that it comes off in this book. My problem was that I just wasn't particularly interested in the gang itself. It seemed kind of petty in comparison to these other gangs that were in this book. I really would have enjoyed a book on these Chinese gangs in Chinatown, actually, because they seemed really interesting. But this is told, there is a young man in this. It focuses on a young man. I cannot remember his name off the top. I think it was Tin. They called him Timmy. And he decided he was at one of these robberies where someone got shot. And he thought that the man who ran the store got killed, but he didn't actually get killed. And so he decided to flip. He got arrested and he decided to work with the government. And he was taking recordings of David Tye and his other gang members and that sort of thing, really putting his life at risk, because these were very violent people who were not averse to killing someone at all. Including a story of a man who had run a store, had been robbed by the Born to Kill gang, and then decided to go with some policemen in broad daylight into the middle of this restaurant, which was their headquarters, and point out who had done this robbery. And David Tye did not take very kindly to that, and he wound up being murdered. Anyway, this was good. It was an interesting look into Chinatown, into the gangs of Chinatown. I really knew nothing about them. I didn't know anything at all about Vietnamese gangs at the time. And this was also a really good look at how a charismatic man, an ambitious man, can take advantage of young men, of people in general who are looking for a better life, who need brotherhood. And that was a big focus of it, because they came from this devastated country. They didn't have their family in this country, most of them. They had come here by themselves a lot of times as very young men, and they needed a sense of family. And David Tye provided that for them in a lot of ways. So this is actually a pretty complex story, and I did enjoy it. I'm just so used to reading books about much larger criminal organizations, I think, is probably why I felt a little bit of a lack in this one. But I don't think that is T.J. English's fault or the book's fault. I think it's just my fault, because I've read a lot of books about criminal organizations over the years. And so the next book, and the one that I DNF'd, is Aliens Book 1, Earth Hive by Steve Perry. This is a Dark Horse novel, so I think that this may have been based on a comic book, although it doesn't say that anywhere on the cover or anything like that, but a lot of these Dark Horse books were based on comics, because Dark Horse made comics. I don't know, does Dark Horse still exist? I heard that maybe Dark Horse is gone. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't really know anything about comics except what I hear other people talk about here on BookTube. Now, I probably could have finished this. I read 76 pages, but I just really wasn't feeling it. And the reason is I felt like it was just a rehash, really, of the other Aliens books that I have read, although I think this may have came first, before most of those. This is from 1992. But it is about a space marine who saved a young girl from a colony that had been overrun by aliens. And they had wiped her mind. They put him into a prison. She's in an asylum. And now the government has come to the marine and wants him to go back to this planet or to the alien homeworld to capture a specimen and bring it back. And he breaks her out of the asylum and off they go. That's about as far as I made it. And I'm going to be honest here. I don't like to say this, but I kind of felt like Steve Perry was just, I don't want to say that he was phoning it in exactly, but it felt very paint by numbers, I guess. I felt like I was getting comic, like panels from a comic just described a little bit better with no depth to them. And I don't know, it did not captivate me. I felt very much like I was reading a very basic book that just didn't have much depth and didn't have much going on other than the plot. And I think I just wanted something a bit deeper. And I've also read so many of these books now that they're all kind of starting to blend together, and they all have very similar plots and themes and characters. I don't know. I just could not get into this one. I just didn't like it. So the last book I finished was Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Raleigh Legacy by L.B. Greenwood. And I just got this on Monday, and now that I'm thinking about it, I guess this counts for P.I. July, because Sherlock Holmes is, of course, a private detective. I didn't really think about that while I was reading it. And I was really surprised that I enjoyed this so much, because I feel like I have been burned by Sherlock Holmes pastiche fiction in the past much more than I have enjoyed it. What this is about is a man comes to Holmes and tells him about this family legacy and asks for some help in fixing it, solving it. Watson has been away, and he comes in, and Holmes tells him about this. And Watson says, well, I know that man. He is the stepfather of a guy that I went to college with. And Holmes is, really? And Watson says, yeah, and I actually wrote a whole story about him because I was trying to enter this contest. And let me go get it. And he goes and gets the story, and Holmes reads it. And he learns that Watson's friend is a descendant of Sir Walter Raleigh, who was the favorite of Queen Elizabeth, the first Queen Elizabeth. And he lives with his stepfather and a woman named Janet, who is sort of their maid, but they have a sort of strange relationship going on. And they live in this giant house called Knightshead, and it is this huge stone pile. It's like a huge square building with these really high up windows, very stark, out in the middle of nowhere. And his friend really does not like his stepfather at all. And he has never known his mother. His mother died shortly after he was born. And so he has grown up with this man whom he despises. And there is a letter left in the family that you can only go to the bank to read, and only the direct descendant of Sir Walter Raleigh can read it. It can't be removed from the bank. It can't be copied or anything like that. So the young man was hoping very much that it would be something that he could solve, and there would be a fortune so he could get away from his stepfather. But it turns out that it's just a jumble of words that don't make sense. And yet Holmes and Watson come to believe that there is much more to this letter and to this story, the stepfather and Janet, the lady who lives with them, and this entire story than meets the eye. And so they set about trying to figure this out. And this book, I really liked this. There are several attempted murders. There's a murder. There are poisonings. There are clues. There are strange people that they have to talk to. And this was very much in that Holmes, that Arthur Conan Doyle style. It wasn't trying to copy it directly or anything like that, but it was from Watson's perspective. Watson was really the main character in this. And I thought it was a really interesting mystery, and I liked the way that they went about solving it, getting to the bottom of this case and the history involved and everything like that. I will say that the one thing that really bothered me about this book, and it's really something that I could overlook, was that in the very beginning, when Watson was traveling to Knightshead, it was detailed as being this really long and arduous trek to get there. Whereas in this book, Holmes and Watson go back and forth to this house many times, to the point where it no longer seems as mysterious and foreboding as it does in the beginning. That was really my one gripe with it. Other than that, I really enjoyed it. I don't want to give too much away because it was an interesting mystery. Yeah, I had so much more fun with this than I thought that I would. And so I'm also reading The Lord of the Rings. I've come to The Return of the King, and I just read The Battle of the Pelennor Field before I started this video, which is one of my favorite chapters in The Lord of the Rings. Probably for a lot of people, I would say that is one of their favorite chapters. I am not a huge fan of The Return of the King, to be honest. I feel like there is a lot that drags the story down in The Return of the King, but it has some of the best scenes and the most memorable scenes of the entire book. And I will talk about that. I'll talk about that more later. And so I'm also reading The Dancing Woolly Masters by Gary Zukav. I'm taking it really slow through this. I've come today, so this is about physics, quantum physics, and Gary Zukav trying to explain in a simpler way how quantum physics works. And today I am dealing with how light is both a particle and a wave. Is something I don't know if I'll ever be able to understand, really. But I am enjoying reading it anyway. And I will talk about this if I ever finish it, I suppose. So that's what I've been reading lately. No real fireworks, but a few good books. Lancaster Target and Born to Kill were both pretty good. The Andy Rooney book, I knew pretty much what I was getting when I was going into it. It was just much more unpleasant than I expected it to be. I kind of was hoping that Andy would be a somewhat more pleasant person in his letters, and that turned out to not be the case. I don't know if I will ever finish the Aliens book. I feel like I've read that story so many times that I think I'm just not interested in it, to be honest. And I will keep on reading, and I want to thank you for joining me. Love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you next time.